Okay, for the benefit of the record, I'll start again that I'm Sue Dean. I'm the parliamentarian for 3rd District PTA. And let me share my screen. Okay, what did I miss? Let's see if I can figure out. There we go. Okay. Whoops. I'm trying to get it to start at the beginning, but we'll get there eventually. I'm sure many of you have had issues like this sort of problem too. Okay, slideshow. And from the beginning. There we go. Now we're in business. Again, welcome. If you'll help us by following some of the rules today, that will be handy. If you keep your site muted, that way I can get through all of the material and we'll have plenty of time at the end to ask questions. So I invite your questions, but if we just save them till the end, that will be helpful. As you go along, that will forget them, and Tom can help me towards the end of reviewing any questions that are on the chat. And then we can ask questions in person at the end. As Tom said, the program's being recorded. And in about a week and a half or so, you should be able to access this recording on our 3rd District PTA website. All you have to do, if you don't want to have your picture recorded on this, you can cut out your video for today's recording. So bylaws, one of the roles of the parliamentarian. So what are the roles of the parliamentarian? As soon as you hear there's 3 of them, you may ask that. Well, the first one is the parliamentarian helps with parliamentary procedure at meetings. The parliamentarian advises the nominating committee. Now, the parliamentarian is not a member automatically of the nominating committee unless they're elected to it, but they call the first meeting of the nominating committee and explain what the job of the nominating committee is and what the job descriptions for the officers that the nominating committee is trying to find people to fill. And then another important one is to facilitate and the review and updating of bylaws. And that's what we're going to focus on today. Why do we have bylaws? Well, they're a required legal document for all nonprofits, not just PTAs. They're a contract adopted by vote of the membership. They provide the framework for PTA's purpose and mission. They establish the structure of the organization. And they define the operational procedures. So you can see they provide a lot of information to you. Now, bylaws cannot be suspended and set aside at a meeting just because you don't want to follow them. They stand as the rules for your PTA at all times. What about if you can't find your bylaws? What do? Well, you can contact 3rd District PTA for a copy. We keep copies of the bylaws for all of our PTAs within the 8 counties that 3rd District PTA covers. Our 3rd District office, email them, and Julie, our secretary, would be happy to send you a copy so you have an idea of what your current, or maybe I should say most recent bylaws are. We use the term current very loosely because unfortunately some of your PTA bylaws are very outdated. So I'm hoping that that's why some of you might be here today, to learn how to update your bylaws. Bylaws tell you about a lot of things. They tell you about your PTA association, your legal name, your ID numbers, your federal, your national PTA ID number, your state PTA ID number, and the ID numbers that you use when filing tax returns with the IRS, with the State Franchise Tax Board, and with the Attorney General's Office Registry of Charitable Trust. They tell you about who serves on your executive board, what officers, whether they're elected, they're appointed, or whatever. Tells you when are your elections. Tells you about your meetings, your association meetings, your executive board meetings. When are they? Tells you about membership. How do you join your PTA? What are the dues? Committees, particularly standing committees, and those are the committees that operate all year long with your PTA, such as committees like communication or committees like membership. And they tell you about the policies, actions, and procedures of operating your PTA. So as you can see, very helpful document to know. Okay, in updating our bylaws, there's some things to consider. It's always easiest to do it by committee. So the president appoints a bylaws committee chaired by the parliamentarian if you have one. And the committee looks at the bylaws and considers, are our bylaws still a good fit for us? Do we have the number of officers that we think help us do the job? Or maybe do we have too many vice presidents and we can't fill those positions? What about committees? Our meetings, when are our association meetings and our executive board members? And is the number of association members too many or too few? What about membership dues? Would we like to increase our dues slightly? If you're operating under very old bylaws, your dues are probably a much smaller amount than you would like to be charging. What about your standing rules? Is there anything that we could add to help us work smarter? You need to keep your bylaws current. Provide copies of the bylaws to board members. And review the bylaws annually, because the bylaws provide the rules of the game. So it's hard to know what the rules of the game are if you've never looked and read through your bylaws. So it's important that at the beginning, very early in the year, it could be very early in the fall, or it could be in the spring right after elections, that the board elect goes through and reviews the bylaws so they know what's in them. You need to update the bylaws at least every 5 years. The IRS says that all nonprofits must have current bylaws. And because we operate under the California State PTA, the California State PTA says that in order to be current, your PTA bylaws can be no older than 5 years. How do you tell how old they are? Look back towards the end and find the signature of the state PTA parliamentarian. That's the date that the state PTA is looking at to determine the age of your bylaws. And your bylaws are only legal if they've been signed by the California State PTA parliamentarian and if they've been voted on to adopt them by your membership. So they're only fully legal if they have all 3 signatures. Now, another reason to have the bylaws current is the state PTA makes changes to the unit bylaws template periodically, and those changes become effective immediately. Well, how are you going to know what changes have been made that you're bound to operate by if you haven't updated your bylaws so that they show in your print copy? So that's important. Keep your bylaws secure. Only share your bylaws with PTA members when requested. You don't have to send them out to all PTA members every year. And you should not be sending them either in print or by electronically out to every family in the school, because the bylaws belong to the organization. Don't post your bylaws on publicly accessible websites. So your bylaws should not be posted on the school website. I do recommend, though, that you keep a copy on file in the school office. That's always helpful when you're doing PTA work at school and you need to check on something in the bylaws, or a PTA member comes in and has a question. You have a copy accessible that you can share with them. So today, we're going to focus on how to use the E-Bylaws program. Oops. Let's figure out how to. There we go. And so creating updated bylaws the easy way is to use the state PTA's E-Bylaws program. Unfortunately, though, it's available only in English. So if you're a PTA where it's important to have bilingual English-Spanish bylaws, the only way you can do that is to use the fillable bilingual bylaws, and I can email you a copy of those. Now, the fillable ones are more difficult to use, though, because you have to know what information to put in each of the blanks. So the state parliamentarian recommends, if you're going to use the fillable bilingual bylaws, that you first fill out the E-Bylaws program, which will automatically put the correct information in all the blanks. And that way you know what information you should enter on the English part of your E-Bylaws and then translate it to the Spanish side. In the E-Bylaws program, you're going to respond to prompted questions. And then the bylaws are automatically completed for you. So it's very, very easy. In working with units, typically when you enter the information, you can have your bylaws up generated in less than 45 minutes, very easily. So it's a three-step process. First, you're going to apply for a username and password. Second, you're going to enter information and then select the options. And those are like bubbles where you click yes or no. And then third, you're going to submit your updated E-Bylaws to 3rd District PTA for review. I look them over to see if there's any problems, and then they're forwarded on to the state. So you do not send your bylaws directly to state. So let's go through it. The first step is to obtain a password. You go to the state PTA website, and it's capta.org. You click across the top of the screen on PTA leaders. You click on Run Your PTA. Click on Bylaws and Standing Rules. Click on the box Check Out E-Bylaws. And then click on the box Request Username and Password. Now, I know that's a lot of notes to take. Don't worry about it. I'll hesitate a little here if you want to take a screenshot of this screen just to be helpful. But I'm also going to show you what it looks like and walk you through it step by step. So this is what your screen, when you go onto the website, is typically going to look like. This area here, don't worry about the picture because it's constantly changing. What you're looking for is these categories across the top. You're going to find PTA leaders. You're going to click on it, drag down to Run Your PTA, go across to Leadership Made Easy, go down to Bylaws and Standing Rules, and then you're going to click on the screen, Check Out E-Bylaws, and then you're going to click on the screen on the box Request Username and Password. And But I'm going through this step by step, so it's really easy for you, and you also can read any of the other information about bylaws while you're doing this. Your username and password should come back to you within, once you submit it to the state PTA, they'll send it back to you by email within 3 to 5 days, but typically it comes much faster than that. So once you have received your username and password, then you're ready to enter information. So you're going to return to the state PTA website. Going to click on PTA leaders at the top of the screen. Click on Run Your PTA. Click on Bylaws and Standing Rules. Click on the box Check Out E-Bylaws. And then this time you're going to click on the box Access E-Bylaws. And now let's look at, again, going through what do you actually see. You're looking across the top for PTA leaders, dragging down to Run Your PTA, over and across and down to Bylaws and Standing Rules. Then you're going to click on the box Check Out E-Bylaws. And when it comes up, you're going to click on the box Access E-Bylaws. So you can see how this is 2 steps. You have to first request a username and password, and then several days later, you're going to go back and actually access the E-Bylaws program. Now, once you access the E-Bylaws program, it will pull up your PTA's bylaws. And the first screen then, after you call up your PTA, is you're going to see an information screen. You cannot change anything on this screen. This is filled out by the state PTA office. Now, look it over carefully to be sure that the information is still correct. Sometimes I'm getting phone calls or emails from units saying, we need to change the grades in our school because we no longer have a 6th grade, or we're now a K-8 school, or we're now a transitional kindergarten through 5th grade. So you need to let me know by email or phone if you need changes made to this screen, either the status of your PTA from a PTA to a PTSA, or the grades in your school. Or I've even had a couple of PTAs have to change the school address as their school built new campuses over the year. In order to change this, 3rd District has to submit a change of status form to the state PTA requesting that change. They will enter, and that form has to be signed by the 3rd District president. Then the state PTA office will make the changes, and then you can print them out or save them showing the correct information as you want it to be. The next screen that shows up is membership and dues. And first of all, you need to remember that membership is not a fundraiser. In this case, this PTA entered $5 as the dues that they were collecting from each member. But if you look down below, when a person joins your PTA, they're also joining the National PTA, the California State PTA, 3rd District PTA, and those dues are here. And the national dues, the state dues, the district dues all add up to $5, which is what we call per capita dues. And those $5 get passed along. You don't get to keep them. So if your PTA is only charging members $5, then the unit portion that you get to keep of your dues is 0. So it's okay to do that. However, the state PTA recommends that you charge at least $6 or $7 so that you have something left for your PTA dues as well. Typically, they need to be a reasonable amount. So they could be 6 or 7 or 8 or 10 or 12, 15. But the higher you price them, you need to think about, are we pricing any of our parents or staff at the school out of joining our PTA? Because we don't want to do that. So if you go up to $25 or $30, you need to think about, is this really reasonable for our particular school situation? Okay, next screen, officers and their election. Do you want to have an executive vice president? And you just click yes or no. Now, PTA does not allow co-officers. So having a vice president of some sort is the person who's the primary aide to the president, since you cannot have co-presidents. If you like a fancier sounding title, you might want to have an executive vice president. Some PTAs say, no, we think that might scare people away and they won't agree to serve. We want just regular vice presidents. So anyway, click yes or no on the executive vice president. Number of vice presidents, and it has a red asterisk. That means it's a required entry. But if you want one vice president, but you want them to be called an executive vice president, and you don't want any additional vice presidents, then you would enter 0 under number of vice presidents, because number of vice presidents is asking for vice presidents in addition to an executive vice president. I would highly recommend, though, that you have a minimum of at least one vice president of some type. Do you want a corresponding secretary? A corresponding secretary is someone who writes the thank you notes and acknowledgements for your PTA. Most of our PTAs no longer have a corresponding secretary because the president either writes these notes or the chairman of a particular event writes them. But it's totally up to you. Do you want a financial secretary? Emphasis on financial. This is not asking about a secretary who takes minutes at your meeting. Most PTAs have a treasurer who makes the deposits and pays the bills. But sometimes you have a lot of money coming in and the treasurer needs help. So you have a financial secretary who handles all the deposits and the treasurer handles paying the bills. Now, keeping in mind, the more officers you have, it's going to affect your quorum requirements for your executive board meetings, and we'll get to that in a bit. So you can always go back and forth and change your answers on these screens as you go through and you think about it. Do you want your auditor to be an officer on your executive board, which means they're a voting member of the board and they are expected to attend monthly board meetings? Your auditor doesn't have to be an officer. You have the choice of board finding a parent or a teacher or a community member to volunteer to audit your books, and they get appointed then. Or the executive board can choose, ratified by the association, to hire a professional to handle auditing your books, particularly if you're using a professional to file tax returns. Many times they are trained and can audit your books as well. So that's up to you, but click yes or no. Nominating committee members. This needs to be an odd number, and it should be more than 1. So typically PTAs choose either 3 or 5, but it's up to you. You should have at least 1 nominating committee alternate, and 2 is okay too, that's just fine. But sometimes, because the nominating committee is elected 2 months prior to the annual election meeting, sometimes things come up and one of the elected nominating committee members can't serve. Maybe they've changed jobs and they've moved out of town, or other reasons that they can't serve. So it's always handy to have elected an alternate who can automatically step in. Officers assume their duties on July 1. This is the same date for all PTAs within 3rd District. So you cannot enter any other date except for July 1. That if you picked a different date, you would have to do more audits. And most of us, it's difficult enough to get the books audited semi-annually and at the end of the year without adding additional required audits in there. So that's why all of our PTAs, their officers assume their duties on July 1 to link up with the start of the fiscal year. Now, sometimes a vacancy occurs in the office of president. Who do you want to serve notice of that vacancy and handle the election? And it's usually handled through chain of command, which means if you have an executive vice president, that would be the logical one to check. But if you don't have an executive vice president, then you would click first vice president here. After you've filled out these answers, go down and click save, and then click next. And you notice there's a button that says previous. So if you've decided you want to go back and fix something or change something on a previous page, you can do that. Okay, association meetings. You're required to have a minimum of 3 association meetings in the year, usually at the beginning of the year, the middle of the year, the end of the year. However, most PTAs have found that it's much easier to handle business if they have 4 or maybe even 5. You can have monthly association meetings, but that's more difficult to get people to attend. And it means there's going to be 2 meetings each month for members of your executive board, because executive board meetings are held every month, and then they would have to come to an association meeting. So typically 4 or 5 is a good number to consider. You get to pick which day of the week and which week of the month, and you use this little arrow and you scroll down until you find whether it's the second week of the month or the first week of the month, and then what day that you want. And then you enter the months going from left to right, just like you would read in a book, with the last month that you're planning to have an association meeting coming after the word and. Annual election meeting month. Now, the state PTA has rules over when you can hold your election, and those rules limit you. You can hold your annual election meeting in March, or you can hold it in April, but April only if your association meeting is either the first or the second week of the month. So in this case, you'll see that this PTA selected the 4th week of the month to hold their association meetings. Well, that meant mandatorily they had to use March for their election. If they wanted to hold an April election, they would have to go back and holding their association meetings on either the 1st or the 2nd week of the month. And this rule change has come along since many of you who are still operating with outdated bylaws, the rules have changed. So you will notice this is an important difference. Now, the president can call a special, which means an additional association meeting, anytime he or she thinks it's necessary. But sometimes something comes up and the president thinks, no, I don't think we need to call a special meeting just for that. But other members of the board think it's important for the membership to get involved in the issue. So how many board members do you want it to take to require that the president call a special association meeting? It should be more than 1, but it could be 2, 3, 4, just a reasonable number though. Now, quorum, that's the minimum number of people that have to be present or participating in an association meeting in order for you to do business. And again, the state PTA has some rules for determining quorum. The smallest number you can have for quorum at an association meeting is 11. But let's go through and talk about what the rules are so you can figure out how you calculate quorum. It's the number of elected and appointed officers, which means it includes a parliamentarian. So it's the number of elected and appointed officers plus 4 or 11, whichever is the larger of the above. So if you had a total of 7 officers plus 4, that's 11. Well, that's the same as the other options. So your quorum would be 11. But if you had 8 or 9 or 10 officers, plus 4, that's going to equal a larger number than 11. So your quorum is going to be higher. So the number of officers serving on your board in excess of 7 is going to affect your quorum for association meetings. So that's something to think about when you're doing this. Executive board. Again, you're going to enter when your meetings are held. Now, executive board meetings are held monthly. They're a separate meeting from the association meeting, and they need to be held 2 weeks prior to the association meetings in any month where there's an association meeting. That allows you to meet the legal requirement of giving notice to your membership over agenda items that they have the right to vote on at the association meeting. So there's a legal requirement. That's why there's that 2-week gap there. Now, PTAs at the beginning of the year vote to adopt a budget. But things come along during the year, and sometimes something comes up that it's going to be a long time, another month till the next board association meeting, but the board says, well, we really would like to spend this money for this. So the bylaws have this category. It's the maximum unbudgeted bills that an executive board can spend on between association meetings, and it's a cumulative total. Now, in this case, they entered 0. And the box got outlined in red, and over here, it is a rectangle that says what the problem is. It says maximum unbudgeted bills. A value is required. So 0 is not a value. So it needs to be more than 0. It needs to be a reasonable amount, not just $25. But there are some rules for determining how much you put in there. So we're going to get to that in the next screen or two. How many board members do you want it to take to require the president to call a special executive board meeting? Again, it needs to be more than 1. So typically PTAs will put like 3, a reasonable amount. Number of members in a quorum. And again, this is for executive board meetings. And here in this example, they entered 4. Well, immediately there's a red box around it, a red line around the box. And over here it popped up, number of members in a quorum. It says executive board quorum size must be at least 5 members. So this is an error, and this would have to be increased to at least 5. Now, the next question, auditor appointment ratified in. If your auditor is an elected officer on your executive board, it will be grayed out and you ignore it. But if you have entered that the auditor is not a board member, then the executive board is going to appoint an auditor, but the auditor then has to be ratified by the association at a meeting that takes place before the mid-year audit is done in January. So typically, the appointment is ratified in October or November. You just have to be sure that the month that you put in there matches up with the month you have an executive board or you have an association meeting. Otherwise, you'll get an error notice again. Here you notice it says you have the choice, can board members meet via teleconferencing? I would strongly recommend that you check yes and leave this option in. Doesn't mean they have to do it in future years, but at least it's always available. It also allows you to make a hybrid meeting too, if you want, if you've allowed that teleconferencing. So that's important. And again, you're going to, once you've filled in this, you're going to click save, and then you're going to go on to the next one. So this is the rules from the state PTA for determining a quorum for executive board meetings. It's the number of elected and appointed officers plus the principal plus the teacher rep divided in half plus 1 or up to the next whole number. For example, if you had 7 officers plus the principal plus the teacher. 2 is 4.5. Well, you can't have a half a person. So up next full number would be 5. And of course, that matches with the other option, which is the minimum 5 that the state PT allows. But if you had more officers, then that number is going to be higher. So it's whichever is the larger of the number of the 2 options. So that's important. The more officers you have, in addition, above 7, the higher your quorum for executive board meetings is going to be. Now, I get asked the question about standing committee chairs. How does that affect the quorum? If you have fewer than 10 standing committees, it doesn't affect your quorum at all. If you have 10 or more, however, then you have to take the total number of the standing committee chairs, divide it in half, and add that number to your number of officers, your principal and your teacher rep divided by 2, etc. So as long as your standing committees are less than 10, fewer than 10, you don't have to worry about any effect on determining your quorum for executive board meetings. Unbudgeted expenditures. State PTA has rules. If you have 8 or more association meetings per year, the highest number you can enter here is $500. If you have 5 to 7 association meetings per year, the highest number you can enter is $750. If you have 3 or 4 meetings, the highest number is $1,000. Now, you can enter smaller numbers, but they should be reasonable. I actually saw a PTA enter $50. Well, you can't buy a whole lot for $50, so that's probably not a reasonable number. But those are the numbers. Now, it doesn't mean that the executive board can spend $1,000 just because the bylaws allow them to do it. The executive board would have to actually check with the treasurer, and do we have an additional $1,000 to be able to spend? And these unbudgeted expenditures are cumulative expenditures between association meetings. So that's something to keep in mind as well. Next screen says council membership. You can ignore this screen. All of the PTAs within 3rd District are out of council units. We used to have 6 councils, but over the years, because of the difficulty in getting officers or the leadership for councils, we've ended up having to disband our councils. So right now, all of our units are out of council, and you can ignore this screen. Just go press on and click next. Duties of officers and chairpersons. Unfortunately, there's a little quirk with the bylaws program that you need to be aware of. The program assumes that all PTAs have 2 or more vice presidents. Well, many of you and I know that there are many PTAs that only have 1 vice president. But the program is designed so, assuming that there's 2, that the additional vice presidents have to be assigned an extra duty. So in this case, where the PTA had an executive vice president and a first vice president, the first vice president was assigned as event coordinator. Could be fundraising coordinator, could be membership chair, could be all kinds of things like that. However, maybe you only have 1 regular vice president, and you don't want to assign them, you want to keep their job duty open-ended. So you also can write in here simply aid to the president. And that's acceptable, but you have to put something in there because that's a required field. And it'll give you error messages if you don't put something. So again, you can put aid to the president, or you can actually assign your first vice president an additional specific duty. It gives you the option of committee members may meet via teleconferencing, yes or no. Again, I encourage you to check yes. That gives you some flexibility. PTA requires 2 signers on all checks. The president and the treasurer are 2 automatic options, but sometimes one of them is not available. They're either sick or out of town, things like that. So it's helpful to have at least 1 additional vice president, and you can have up to 2. In this case, the PTA clicked first vice president. They didn't have an executive vice president. They didn't have a historian, etc. So they only have now a total of 3 possibilities: a president, a treasurer, and the first vice president. You notice the positions of secretary and auditor are missing here, and they cannot be check signers. So again, click save, and then go on and click next. Standing rules. Well, standing rules are procedural. They're more flexible, and you can amend them at any association meeting with a majority vote. The nice thing is you can also add additional standing rules to help your PTA work more efficiently. Here, they're asking you, do you have any standing committees? Now, you don't have to have any, so you can leave this blank. It's not a mandatory field. But some examples of committees that operate all year long, that's what a standing committee is, are communication, or hospitality, or fundraising, or school garden, or programs, or family engagement. And you just click add a row so that you can keep adding them if you have more than 1. So if you enter anything here, click save, and then go on. Now, if you haven't fixed your errors as you went along, you're going to have to. Some of those errors that come up, for example, in this case, they their executive first Tuesday of the month, but they had also clicked that their association meetings would be the second Tuesday of the month. That's only a week between, and the rules are you have to have 14 days between association meetings. So they would have to change the board meeting or go back and change the association meeting so that they have 14 days between them. Now, if you changed it and still got an error message and you couldn't figure out, we had one PTA not too long ago who could not figure it out. Well, call me or email me. I have access to the E-Bylaws program for all of the units in 3rd District. And a lot of times I can figure out what your problem is pretty quickly and save you a lot of stress and time. This particular PTA couldn't figure out why the error wouldn't go away. Well, they had clicked that their association meetings would be on the first Wednesday of the month. And then they'd put in that their executive board meetings would be on the 3rd Thursday of the month. So they had first week and 3rd week, but it was only 13 days apart, not 14, and the program would not allow it. And minor little things like that are important. Now, if you try to print out your bylaws and you haven't fixed the error messages, you're going to get a draft watermark across every page, including the front cover, and you can't send them in that way. So if you get that and you don't know what to do, call me up. A lot of times, right while you're working on the program, if I'm available, I'll hop right on and call up your school's E-Bylaws program too, and we can figure out what the problem is really quickly. So fix all of your problems, save it, and remember, you save the changes when you fix the problem on a page. And then you will get a message that bylaws are complete. Down here it says it, but it typically now pops up in the top right-hand corner too, to tell you that your bylaws are complete. Then, when they're complete, you'll click on the box that says bylaws, down where you were going next or previous. Click bylaws, it builds the bylaws automatically for you. And here's what the cover will look like. Now, so you've gotten your password, you've actually entered the information and built your bylaws. You're going to save them as a PDF on your computer, and you're going to submit them to 3rd District PTA for review, which means you're going to, first of all, make a list of the changes that you made, and then you're going to share those changes with your executive board. Your board approves the changes, but they don't sign anything yet. And you prepare a PTA bylaws submittal form to send in also, and that's found on the 3rd District PTA website under forms. It's also found if you go to training. In a week or so, when you go to training and you scroll down to find the recording of this workshop, then next to it will be the handouts for this workshop, and you can click on the transmittal form for the bylaws for that. And you're going to put, when you fill out that submittal form, it's going to have contact information for you, so I know who to get back to if I have questions or we need to resolve issues. And it'll also have a list of all the changes. The state parliamentarian wants to know, what changes are you making on your bylaws from these proposed updated bylaws compared to your existing bylaws that you are using. So you're going to submit them to 3rd District, but you can't submit the bylaws by themselves. You have to submit the submittal form and the bylaws. You can send a copy by email unsigned to 3rd District office at 3rdpta.com. You also can send it directly by email to me if you would like, and at the end of this program you'll have my email address as well. If you send it to the office, the office secretary, the bylaws, when you submit them, are typically within a day or two. I will get back to you if there are issues that we need to fix. Once I submit them on to the state parliamentarian for his approval and signature, it can take as much as 6 weeks, but typically it's 3 weeks or often a little sooner than that. So, but don't be panicked. You can expect that it might, depending on how busy he is, it might be up to 6 weeks to complete this process. After your bylaws are returned, they're going to be returned by email to me, and then I email them back to the person who submitted them to 3rd District. In order to be fully legal, they have to be adopted by your school PTA association. The president has to give 30 days notice to your membership and place on the agenda for an association meeting that you're going to update those bylaws, and the vote takes a 2/3 majority vote of those present at the meeting to adopt those updated bylaws. They need to be signed and dated by the president and the secretary at that point when they've been adopted, and they become effective immediately. And copies are printed out double-sided for the board. And we also ask that you would send a copy, scan and send a copy of the signature page to 3rd District PTA so that we can insert it in the copy of the bylaws that we keep on file in our office. That way, in the future, if anyone from your PTA needs a copy of your bylaws because you can't find it, we can send you a fully signed copy of those bylaws. So if you have any questions, again, I'm Sue Dean. I'm the parliamentarian for 3rd District PTA, and there's my email. My cell phone number, 916-206-7658. Again, if anybody needs it, my cell phone is 916-206-7658. So now you can all unmute yourself, and if anybody has questions that they want to ask, feel free.
Hi, Sue. Good afternoon.
Welcome.
Hi, I don't know. Oh, you could hear me good. Sometimes this thing acts
No,
up.
I can hear you just fine.
Perfect. I just wanted to first off say hi and introduce myself. I wanted to confirm. I did look online to see who the mentor would be for New Tech, and I just wanted to confirm: are you the mentor for this?
Yes, I am I am the mentor for New Tech. In fact, I'm the individual that helped organize your PTA when you were brand new. So
Oh,
I've been around a while.
that is wonderful to hear. I'm very new. I've always been a member of PTSA, but I've never served on the board. So this is going to be my first time ever doing this. So I'm a bit nervous. How often do we communicate, or how often am I allowed to ask questions?
Anytime you
Okay.
feel free to email me, call
Okay.
me,
Perfect. Thank you.
however often that you want. I'm here to be helpful, and that's the best way to be helpful, because I'm not going to be a mind reader. So you need to contact me.
Yes, ma'am.
Several times during the year, I will send out emails to my units, and our other mentors will send emails to their units, reminding you, like sending out the calendar and sharing it, sending out an updated financial remittance form, and things like that. I will remind you of due dates, especially for sending in additional membership. Many PTAs use Totem for electronic membership,
Okay.
but sometimes you might have additional members that join the old traditional way with the envelope by cash or check.
Okay.
And if any members that have joined by Totem, your PTA treasurer doesn't have to do anything,
Okay.
because Totem automatically passes on at the end of each month the district portion of their dues to us, the state portion to the state, and the national portion to national.
I see. I see.
But
Okay.
if you've had any people that have joined by check or cash, then your treasurer needs to send on that $5 per capita for each member to third district, and we will remind you of those deadlines.
Okay. Awesome.
We'll also remind you of the deadlines for paying your insurance.
Okay.
Now, starting this next year, paying the insurance is going to be a little bit different, because it used to be you wrote a check and sent it in to third district. We collected them from all of our units and did a one transfer of money to the state. Well, starting this next year, each PTA unit is going to be paying the insurance company directly. AIM, which is our insurance broker, but you'll get information about how to do that.
Okay.
The state PTA, but as a mentor, we'll be sending out reminders and things too, to be sure it doesn't slip through the cracks, because it will be new for every single PTA as a new procedure this coming year.
Okay. Awesome.
And then we'll also remind you of the deadline for filing your tax returns. PTAs, for the most part, don't pay taxes, but they have to file informational tax returns with the IRS, the California State Franchise Tax Board, and with the California Attorney General's Office Registry of Charitable Trust. And you can get in big trouble and fines and everything else if you don't file those returns in a timely manner.
Okay.
So we try to be helpful and remind you about that approaching.
Great, awesome. Thank you for that, Sue. So I will definitely, I just want to make sure, can you repeat your phone number once again?
916
Yes, ma'am.
206
Uh-huh.
7658.
Perfect. That's what I wrote down. Perfect. I'm going to rewatch the recordings. I missed the one about communication. I had a prior engagement, but I am going to rewatch the recordings. I'm sure I'm going to have a ton of questions, and I hate to bother, but I do want to make sure that I do a good job for New Tech, and I'm just really excited to be here. So thank you
Well,
for answering this, and this is a great meeting. I am going to so when and I haven't. I've only had the privilege of sitting down with Vanessa, who's our treasurer. We had coffee
mhm.
together. I'm not sure if the current president. I know that the bylaws are sensitive documents, so I will, I am able to email, I think I wrote down Julia, once I become president and gets initiated in, I can email Julia just to get a copy of that bylaw. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay,
Well,
okay.
if you are an elected officer, so you're an officer elect because your PTA has held their elections, you can get access, you can communicate with her now and with the rest of your board elect and start planning and things like that too. So you can
Okay.
hit the ground running. You don't have to wait. You can only take action, sign contracts, things like that after July 1.
Yes, ma'am. Okay.
But the
Okay.
planning, we encourage you to get started immediately. And that's why we're delighted that you're here participating in the training workshops that we're trying to provide. Just keep in mind that to wait about a week in order for Tom, our Vice President of Communication, to have time to update the 3rd District website,
Yes, ma'am.
to show these recordings for you, and so you can access all the handouts and things like that. He may get it done sooner, but he has another life too, so we're not
Yes,
promising
ma'am.
for at least a week or so.
Yes,
But
ma'am.
again, the 3rd District website that you're going to be going to, www.3, so it's 3rdpta.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I also see that information as well in the chat. I just took and copied it into one of my sticky notes as well. Thank you so
Okay.
much. I want to make sure I have all my resources.
Well, that's the idea. So,
and this has been really great. I mean it. I went to the first night meeting and it was just awesome information. And I'm starting to feel so much better about my role. And I definitely want to support my school. And this is great. So I thank everyone who's been holding this meeting, and you, Sue. Thank you so much.
well, we just thank you for coming and participating and taking your time to do this.
Yes,
So thank you.
No, you're very welcome.
Any other questions?
Sue, anybody that's a member of the PTA, don't they have access? So if she's already a member of the PTA, doesn't she already have access if she needs to the bylaws? Or
she has access to them, yes. Now the PTA may or may not want to be having them floating out there, so they might email her a copy now, or they may want her to just view it at the school office, that kind of thing, as a member. That all depends, but she does have access to it, yes.
okay.
But as an officer elect, the current president can email her the bylaws and all other kinds of share other PTA information too.
Okay, all right. So just from a technical point of view, if you're a member of the PTA, do you have the right to have the bylaws? So for some reason,
yes, yes, you have the right. You can ask for a copy. I know before the pandemic, some PTAs kept 2 copies of the bylaws in the office, and they would send them home with a kid if a parent requested it, to see a copy of the bylaws, that they wanted a print copy and the parent couldn't come in. That was before we were allowed to share all of this electronically. But now sharing it electronically isn't a problem. As long as we just share with PTA members, not a problem.
Okay, all right, good.
Okay.
Just wanted a clarification in case any PTA ever ends up with like a president that's a tyrant and says, oh no, I'm not going to let anybody else see the bylaws.
Oh no, every member is entitled to see them. Now, if they ask for a print copy, the PTA is allowed to charge. If the school charges them for making copies or something, then the PTA is allowed to charge for a copy if they want to print. But most of the time that never happens. They either share the print copy or now they can share it electronically.
Okay, good.
I think we can end our recording.